All right, welcome to the June 26th meeting of Gateway API. Thanks to everyone who's able to make it today. I've got a pretty full agenda, but as always, feel free to add topics below so we can discuss them in more detail. Before we go too much further, just want to mention that this is a Kubernetes community meeting, which means we abide by the Kubernetes Code of Conduct. At a very high level, that just means to be nice to each other. So please do that. We haven't had any issues there. And then one last thing, I do see a couple potentially new names, or maybe I'm just bad at recognizing names. But if anyone is new and wants to introduce themselves, by all means, you're welcome to. I'll give a few minutes now if anyone wants to introduce themselves.
Hi everyone. This is Arun from Nutanix. So this is my first meeting with the Gateway API team, and yeah, I'm just trying to understand how Gateway API is used and what are some of the hot topics of discussion right now, and see how we can use Gateway API at Nutanix in the future, right? So that's the motivation for joining the group. And hopefully we might have some inputs going forward as to what we require, or what the direction that we want to suggest and stuff. Yeah, so good to be in the meeting and hope to join in future meetings as well.
That's awesome. Welcome. Good to hear from you. And yeah, we're always looking for new perspectives and obviously new implementations or anything else. So definitely interested in what you think, and don't hesitate to ask questions at any point throughout this meeting. That goes to anyone. You can definitely raise a hand using Zoom's feature, or also just drop something in chat as well. Anyone else want to introduce themselves? Cool. All right. Well, great to see everyone here. Let's get right into our agenda then. First up, the meetings next week are canceled. If you're in the US, that's probably not too much of a surprise, but in the US, there is a holiday weekend. Tuesday is July 4th. If you're in Canada, you might also be taking some time off around Canada Day. So as a result, I expect not many people will be around next week for our meeting. So just going to go ahead and cancel them. Of course, if there are enough people that do want to meet, definitely won't prevent that. But historically, interest has been low during these weeks. So unless I hear otherwise, I'll go ahead and cancel those meetings. Just also want to mention, I know we've kind of been talking about this for a bit, but at a high level, we're starting to look towards moving Gateway API meetings. So this meeting here to rotate between earlier and later times. So this is a time that mostly works for APAC time zones. It's still, I know, pretty painful in some cases, but it roughly works for US and APAC time zones. But we've also been experimenting with earlier times that work for different continents as well. And so we're considering moving that to rotate similar to what Gamma is already doing. And also considering moving away from Monday. So maybe Tuesday or Wednesday, and maybe similar meeting times to what Gamma already has. And then there's also been some discussion about Gamma moving to bi-weekly meetings. So very, very, very much open to ideas here. This is just what we've been sketching out as a rough direction for when we might change meetings and meeting times. But please, as always, if you have ideas, don't hesitate to let us know. And then next up, I just want to get right into the 080 milestone. This is coming up awfully quickly, and I just wanted to highlight what we still have in here. I cleared out some of the things that no longer exist. I'll highlight some things shortly that don't have anyone working on them right now. But as we've done with some other releases, although we have an aspirational list in this milestone, the only things that we're going to block the release on are these release blockers. So right now we have a release blocker that Mike has already filed a PR for, which is great. And then we have a couple release blockers that are related to documentation, and Flynn is taking those on. There's not much else. This is actually the release blocker that Mike is working on right now. So there's not much else in progress that we're considering release blockers. There are lots of things we would really like to include though. So again, if you have some extra cycles this week, would love to get some of these issues knocked out. I chatted with people that do have something assigned to them and checked in on their progress. I know Spencer's going to take another look at this one. But there are also some open ones. So yes, this is the 080 milestone. We're hoping to get code complete end of this month, so end of this week really, and then begin API review early in July and work on a final release by the end of July. These are very approximate. If you've been around Gateway API releases before, you know that we usually slip our dates at least a bit, but these are our aspirational goals for when this will hit. I see a comment in here. Yes, please, if you can add that to the agenda, that would be great. Maybe just drop it right before triage. I would like to talk about the egress PR. Thanks for adding it. All right, so the things for the 080 milestone here. First up, there's one that Michal had added for a problem that we have right now, which is conformance tests require a listener on port 8080. That is not intentional, I don't think. So it sounds like we have two tests that have a listener on 8080 right now, and we need someone to clean them up because right now we've basically said the only core conformant ports that are supported are 80 and 443. And anything beyond that, we have to be very clear is extended support. So if we're using 8080 in concert with an extended feature, maybe that's okay, but it should really only be a very intentional choice when we're doing that. We do not have anyone working on this right now, so if anyone has some time, it would be great to get a volunteer on this one. Just while we're at this meeting, anyone have some cycles that they could spend on it this week? All right, well, no need to volunteer right in this moment, but definitely the choice of open source, the more people that are able to contribute, the faster we can move towards a release. So would love to get this one sorted out before we release 080, but this is not what we're calling a release blocker. Next up, 1822. This is something that really is just a tiny Godoc update. So if you're new and wanting to make a small contribution to Gateway API, this is one that I'm sure any one of us would be very happy to help you with. This is just making a tiny clarification in the Gateway class Godoc that just makes it very clear that implementations are expected to populate status on every Gateway class that specifies their controller name. So that is something that no one is working on right now. And again, it's a really good place to get involved. I'd say this is probably one of the most straightforward ones to jump in on if you're new and looking to contribute.
Yeah, I could take a look.
Oh, awesome. Awesome. I don't know your GitHub, but if you don't mind commenting on this one, I'll drop it in Zoom chat. Yeah, would be great. And don't hesitate if anything is unclear here, don't hesitate to ask in Slack or on the issue. But yeah, thanks for volunteering.
Yeah. I mean, I need to figure out whether I should use my official account or my personal. So I'll just clarify that and update on the ticket.
Yep.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Great, thanks. And then finally, the last one we have here. This is one that kind of got lost. We had some issues discussing it, but unfortunately it got lost in the noise because the issues discussed bigger, broader things. But one of the problems right now is that you can specify an HTTP route that looks like this and is basically nonsense, right? Because if you're redirecting, it is going to go through a different routing mechanism, right? Whatever. And a redirect and a backend ref can't really coexist on the same HTTP route rule. It should be fairly straightforward to add some validation to our webhook to prevent this from happening. So there's a link here to where that validation would be added. So it would be just some Go code that you would add to prevent this case, both of these being specified in the same route rule. And then where you can add this to as kind of a test case to ensure that your validation worked as expected. So this is another one that we're looking for some volunteers for, just trying to clean up our validation so that we know that we really are covering as many edge cases as possible. Any volunteers for this one?
Rob, do you happen to have the original intent for this? When this was this something to help with transferring all HTTP to HTTPS kind of thing, or was this something else?
Oh yeah, I completely get that. So I should link to the original issue. Where this originally came up is I think it was someone from Nginx actually raised this as an issue. Maybe I'm getting that wrong, but somebody raised the issue that we do not have any clarity on redirect loop protection, right? So we don't have any clarity today in API of if you hit a route and it says redirect to HTTPS and you're already on HTTPS, what do you do? What this is kind of saying is, well, at a minimum, we should just recommend that you don't try and combine a redirect with backends, right? Those are separate things. They should be in separate routes. You should have a route that does your redirect and a route that forwards traffic to backends, and you shouldn't try and merge those concepts. This is kind of tangential to that redirect loop protection, but it is related in the sense that this is a config that we're considering invalid, and we want the validating webhook to catch that so it's just more obvious to users and better user experience than waiting for a controller to have an issue and publish something in status. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, that sounds good.
So yeah, if anyone wants to volunteer, please do comment on this issue. Be another one that would be great to get cleared up before we hit 080. All right, I'll keep on moving here. All right, so that is the scope of the 080 milestone. The one other thing that I want to call out is that we're really rushing this 080 milestone because we're trying to get it in July, because we're trying to get another release out, and that's 1.0 in October. So this is going to be a pretty express release cycle for Gateway API. Traditionally there's been closer to 6+ months between releases, but we released 0.70 in May. 0.80 is primarily something like that exists to state that Gamma is experimental. So it's primarily Gamma's release, but we're also trying to get some bug fixes and other small additions into the API as part of that. But then the big goal is 1.0 coming this fall in October. Any questions about any of this before we move on? All right, we'll keep on going. Candace, you had some content about TLS from gateway to backend.
Thanks, Rob. So this is the GAP 1897, and this is a GAP that's talking about TLS from gateway to backend. There are a few comments on it that I wanted to bring up in the group because they seem they're pretty substantial comments, and I just want to see what the group is thinking about this. There hasn't been a lot of traffic on this pull request, but thank you to everyone who has provided feedback on it. So first of all, in this enhancement proposal, it's centering on a new object called TLS connection policy, which already has a background in some of the other docs in Gateway API. So mostly everybody's familiar with the general format of it. Do you want me to share my screen, Rob, or?
Yeah, that would be great. Let me make you a co-host real quick, and I'll stop sharing, and it's all yours.
Okay. So with Zoom, you can't actually share a tab. You have to share the whole screen. All right. Sorry, give me one more second.
No worries. I deal with the same thing plenty of times.
You use
The
both.
joys of going between. Yeah.
Yeah. At least I don't have the audio issues now that I used to have. I think this is what I want to share. Just to start.
I see the agenda, so that looks promising.
Right. So
maybe if you can make your window a bit narrower, that might help. At least me. No big deal if not.
narrower. Does that help?
Oh yeah, that is perfect for me. Yeah.
Okay. So this is the GAP, and let me. Did I stop sharing? Yeah, this isn't working out so well.
No, I still see the GAP files changed. I think that's where you want to be.
I don't want to show comments, just so that we can talk about specific issues. So there is the. Here, let me show it in a better format. So here is the TLS connection policy. And this is the main struct that we'll be focusing on going forward. There were some requests within the pull request to make sure that we were covering MTLS in this enhancement proposal. And we had from the beginning said that MTLS would be out of scope for this particular enhancement proposal. But within the pull request, a few people asked whether we can make sure that we are providing a way where we could sort of have a path for MTLS going forward. So what I wanted to suggest was that for MTLS, we would add a MTLS connection policy, not within this gap, but in order to just be able to use the idea that we've been using in TLS connection policy and create another policy that's an MTLS connection policy specifically for MTLS. And by doing that, we maintain the scope of the original enhancement proposal, which is not including MTLS from the beginning. Does anybody have any objections to that, or feel like we really need to do something a little bit more substantive for MTLS at this point in the proposal?
Well, MTLS would be driven by the server-side policy, right? TLS policy. If it forces a MTLS, the handshake, adjusts itself appropriately. And from a gateway API perspective, we are the client side of the proxy in this case, right? Shouldn't it be automatic for us here?
Well, they're not necessarily, because within by using MTLS, there's a lot more that needs to be specified in the configuration than by just going purely with TLS.
Okay,
in this
but
connection
in that
policy.
case- okay, in that case, would this might have to be included in the same object, because the server side will drive the connection, and you can even, in theory, you can switch from TLS to MTLS in the middle of a connection as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Go ahead, Rob.
Sorry, no, I agree with the ideas there that I think what we're configuring here is, like you're saying here, TLS from gateway to backend, and MTLS from gateway to backend is really just building on top of that. It's adding a bit more information. So in my opinion, I feel like a solution here is to just have the small scope that we have today, which is basically just a CA that we're using to validate the cert served by the backend. But again, the gateway is doing that validation, and then expand this in the future to include MTLS configuration. I think there's been some discussion and desire to provide some kind of automatic option here, but at least in some cases, users are going to want to be able to specify a client cert that the gateway should use to connect to a backend, or something a bit more specific here. So my thought is that this can all fit in the same policy, but it does not need to come in the same gap. And I think, Candace, your primary concern here is that you don't want this gap to just become, overly massive and too big in scope. And so I think I'm agreeing that MTLS can be out of scope for this initial resource, this initial work, but that we can and probably should think about adding it in the future, in a future version of this API. I don't know, does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I could add something, add some text to that effect, and not worry about necessarily adding a MTLS connection policy to replace this one. Okay, so the next issue and sorry, there's 4 here. I hope I don't go over time. Please let me know if it's.
Yeah, actually, just I want to write. You may not be able to see this, but John left a comment. I think he had to drop. But in Zoom chat, he left a comment saying that the current model is basically broken for MTLS due to attachment. And from his perspective, the attachment needs to happen at the client side, which would be the gateway side in this case, for MTLS to be used effectively. I feel like this same policy, all of it could be attached to gateways. Well, I don't know, to be determined. But I think that's a very important detail, where you're actually trying to target this, and this comes back to the personas. But just wanted to make sure that John's comment got mentioned at least.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you want, I'll just take the first two here. If there's not enough time, let someone else talk for a while and then come back to the second two.
Cool. Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. So the second one that I want to talk about was the choice of for trusted CA cert refs. I chose an array of secret object reference, which has gotten a couple of different comments in the pull request about that not necessarily being the right object for this. First, because, well, for one, because secret object reference contains TLS key and TLS cert, and both are not needed for MTLS. I mean, so both are not needed except for MTLS. And Rob, that you had suggested maybe we could use a config map here rather than a secret object reference. Or perhaps in the future, even replace that with something that is more Gateway API specific in terms of how we want to store the trusted CA cert references. I'm good with the config map. I don't know how other people feel about that. I did add another issue, 2147 for, oh, sorry, that's someone else is typing there, and my focus went there. So we could aim for a different Gateway API specific object to store the certificate references in the future. Is everybody okay with the config map to begin? Is there not enough people here to sort of talk about that at this point?
What was the objection to the secret object reference array?
Yeah, so, or sorry, you can go ahead, Candace.
The objection was that it contains TLS key and TLS cert, and those are the TLS key is not needed except for by MTLS.
Yeah,
So
the secret. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Sorry, the secret object reference, I think we specifically say needs to reference a secret of type Kubernetes IO TLS, and that requires those two keys, those two keys in the secret map, basically. So yeah, what Candace said there, that we don't really have anything to fill those, and then kind of at a higher level, there's nothing about a CA cert that is intended to be secret.
Right.
And so putting it in a secret feels maybe not the best.
Okay.
So in that case, using something that's clearly intended to be public just avoids any confusion.
Okay, so this is a representation of the CA bundle that is traditionally imported into browsers, right?
Yes.
Okay. In that case, this would be required for non-MTLS also, right? Did someone mention this is only for MTLS?
No. I think there was some confusion there that we could benefit from a secret object reference when we're considering the client cert that we use for MTLS, but it's not useful for just a CA cert that we have right now in the scope of things.
I see. Okay.
So
Does it feel weird to put a CA into a config map?
yes. Yes, it does. I would love to see. I think that there's been some encouragement from SIG Auth for us to start using our own types to represent things like certificates, and certainly CA bundles would fall under that, I think. It just the more types you have, the easier it is to grant meaningful RBAC access, because that's really the only thing you can grant based on. And so in this case, I think eventually we'd want to have just a very, very simple Kubernetes resource that was just for representing this. But while this is experimental, while we're just testing it out, I feel like a config map broadly is just a place you can add information that is considered public, which is roughly what I would consider this to be. And config map also has some nice utilities like from file that could be useful here. There's a Dave, you've got a hand.
Yeah, just for those that don't know, there's also Kubernetes creates a CA cert in every namespace in a config map. So if you just say like get config maps for your namespace, you'll see, what is it called? kube-root-ca.crt, and that lets any pod or deployment workload like do a downward API into your workload, and then you can access the Kubernetes API. So there is a convention already upstream on like putting CA certs and config maps is okay. Ish.
No, that's an awesome reference. I completely missed that, but thank you. Cool. And then from Zoom chat, Mikhail is saying, I know I'm saying your name wrong, so please correct me if I. But yes, I think it's a good question. If too many different resource kinds to watch can become problematic. We've definitely been doing some thinking, and by we, I mean the GK implementation of this API has been working on scalability and doing some testing on that side as well. It's not so much, at least in my experience, it's not so much the different number of kinds you're watching, it's just the number of resources themselves that you need to get updates for. So yeah, you want to avoid watching things that are irrelevant to you. One of the things that we've been experimenting with is watching individual resources as they're referenced, or watching things that we know are only relevant to our controller. It would be very expensive, you can imagine, to watch all config maps or all secrets, but it becomes much more reasonable to watch only the config maps that you know are directly referenced by resources that you're implementing. So yeah, just some thoughts there, but definitely a consideration that we should take in. We should represent somewhere in our implementation guidelines at a minimum.
Okay, so I'm going to give back some time to other people who I feel like config map is a not a bad way to go for this, and I feel like I kind of got a little bit of support from the community so far. So I'm going to give some time up rather than get into these two topics. Although, yeah, I can put these two topics in the Slack channel if we don't end up getting to it today. But thanks for the opportunity to talk about this for a little bit.
Yeah, this is great. Thank you for all you're doing to push this forward. Yeah, I'm excited to see this move. I know it's been a kind of a slow moving thing, but I think we actually are getting close to something that we can release. So I'm excited about that. Let me make sure I'm actually sharing the right thing all over again. Yeah, this looks approximately correct. Everyone see the agenda?
Yes.
Awesome, thanks. All right, I just want to do a quick little shout out here because I know we've had a lot of GEPs and that have just kind of iterated and gone through hundreds of comments, and a couple of them merged today, I think, but very recently anyways. So one was the timeouts API and the other was routability. So a huge thanks to the many people that commented, and to Dave and Frank both for pushing through. You can see this started on January 16 and May, but these are multi-month 100 comment plus PRs. Lots of reviewers. Just really appreciate the feedback here and glad to see these moving forward. Yeah, I don't know if I think Dave, you're on the call, but Frank, either one of you, if you have next steps or things we can help to move these forward, after the fact, let us know. But thank you for putting up with this insane feedback cycle.
Just a clarification, because I was gonna piecemeal small changes to change the code. Are you saying you want kind of like a big shebang before the end of the week? Is that what you're?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. I think piecemeal is fine. I just want to have all the pieces present. What I'd hate to do is release half of a feature, right? And because we have a release coming up so soon, I want to just, before we merge anything, I want to make sure that all the pieces are visible and fit, so we don't just have half of it in.
Okay.
Or worst case, we have some types moved out, but then it doesn't really make sense because, anyway. But I think what you're doing of just doing small PRs is sensible, just as long as they all exist and fit together.
Okay. So I guess you're looking to see a chain, and then you merge the chain when we get all the stuff linked up.
Yeah, I think whatever makes sense for you. Again, this is just my perspective, but I do like small PRs. And usually if we were further away from a release, I just merge right away. But just because we're close to release, I just want to make sure we're all lined up.
Okay, sure.
Cool. Awesome. Well, yeah, these two are exciting to get through. And then we've got one other big gap. Thank you for bringing this one up. Egress. You're on the call, right?
Yes. Hi, Rob. Hi, everyone.
Hey, welcome. So what is the state of this? I think this one do we just need more review on this?
Yeah, so we're just, I understand that the last state, it was /hold put on. Shane was able to review it and approve it, and wanted to make sure that more people was able to take a look. And I appreciate the attention that has been given to this gap. And my newness to this process. So I'm not really sure if I'm doing the correct things to move it forward. And I just got an email that says that this might go into after 90 days of inactivity, there might be a life cycle for /stale applied to this gap or a pull request. And I just quickly went ahead and put in the remove lifecycle stale, not realizing that there was no lifecycle stale tag put on this gap. So I'm a pull request. Kind of embarrassing, but anyway. No. I'm like, oh my gosh, something's going on, and it's the weekend. I was like, I'll just adjust it later.
Yeah,
but
Yeah, no, I completely understand it. It is a not very friendly part of Kubernetes infrastructure is that there's a bot that goes around and starts marking things that haven't had activity as stale, and then there's a few different levels, and then eventually closes it if no activity happens. It is sadly reflective of the reality that there are more issues and PRs than there are reviewers across the entire Kubernetes ecosystem. And so there's just but it's a very unfortunate
Right.
and confusing state, especially for people who are new to the process. So sorry.
No worries. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure because I know that we've kind of been in the holding pattern, and that's partially our fault too, just getting busy with other things.
Yeah.
But this is very much a big interest for us to keep it moving along. So whatever we have to do to jiggle the handle to make sure that it stays fresh, we'll do it.
I think exactly what you're doing here of just kind of bringing it back up to meetings is a kind of way to bring some visibility back to a topic. And this is, I think if I'm remembering correctly, you initially proposed an API and then you kind of pulled back from it because that had gotten a little controversial. And now you just have some kind of use cases, goals, non-goals, and just trying to agree on the problem at this point. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. So we
Cool.
gone through some iteration of refining the goals and non-goals and the TLDR and things like that. But yeah, we're definitely, like privately move forward with the API design and implementation. I was just wondering, when should we surface it?
Yeah.
Or should we just wait and just keep in this holding pattern until there's more eyes on this gap?
No, I mean, this is one that needs attention. I know egress has come up constantly, and we've needed someone to move it forward. Yeah, I'm trying to, right now, we're all pretty focused on release and GA, but I don't want to let this one slip too far because I know everyone wants to do, well, I shouldn't say everyone, a lot of people want to do egress with this API. And I would hate for lack of an OSS standard, for there just to be, 10 different ways to do egress with the same API. Because I know like most of the pieces are already there and you can just use it different ways to represent that. And I'd love to have a standard before we go too far. I'm not sure the best time because I want to make sure we actually get 080 out, but I would like to say mid-July is probably going to be a good point to bring this one back up. Candace, you've got a hand. Maybe you have some ideas.
I was just wanted to suggest that to do a survey of implementations and see if anybody's already doing egress. Like, does Istio already do egress? Because I think when I've introduced topics in the past, there are representatives of the implementations as part of the group that want to see how others are doing it, if it's the same as they're doing it, and if your proposal takes into account, any prior art or, implementation, aligns with any existing implementations. Does that make sense?
That's a great point, and maybe that's just just maybe I didn't do the due diligence of polling or searching or scavenging for implementations out there. So yeah, okay, I will definitely make that as a note too, because there is a note that if there's only so there's a note from Shane that says if we're unable to find more than one implementation that would want this kind of functionality, you know, this might jeopardize the gap to become declined, right? And so
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think it's not so much about due diligence, but just about how do you draw more people in to take a look at
Okay.
it? And if you
Yeah.
mention their name or their implementation in it, then I feel like it draws them in to
Yeah,
look at it.
It absolutely does. Thank you for bringing that up, Candace. It's such a good thing that has happened in our recent gaps, and I would love to see it happen more. And that's absolutely a great way to bring more people into this. When other implementations see, oh, here's how our API relates to this thing that's being proposed, it automatically brings more interest in, and I think there's a lot of egress representations out. So if you look at the timeouts gap, if you look at the session persistence gap, and if you look at the TLS gap that Candace is working on, those ones come to mind as ones that did very well at defining the status quo of other APIs out there. And you don't have to do everything. Like, for example, the timeouts gap tried its best. I think Nick tried his best to, understand what others are doing, but very much one of those things where implementations came through and corrected as they saw things that weren't quite right. And I think that's exactly what we want to have happen here. And it's also very helpful for reviewers to understand the full state of the world as we're looking at a gap and trying to build an API that works for as many of those as possible. So yeah, that's absolutely a great next step. And another thing that's not particularly controversial, it's just really helpful for laying the groundwork and foundation for everything that comes after.
okay, that makes sense. We were thinking, like, do we need to, and not really name names or drop some names at other people that have expressed interest. Anyways, we weren't sure what was, how do we
Yeah.
make sure that other people are interested, or say that there are interested parties?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think it kind of comes almost, I wouldn't say for free, but by listing implementations of the API and how they and that they're already implementing similar functionality with their own vendor specific APIs, it almost assumes, but certainly communicates that there would be interest from them in representing this further. There's maybe a better way to do it, but that's a really good starting point at least. And I think I also want to highlight what Mike mentioned in chat, that there's plenty of interest on the mesh side of things for egress. So, circulating this concept in Gamma meetings, which are on Tuesdays right now, could be really helpful as well, just to gauge interest.
Okay. Should I guess I could attend those as well. I think some of our team members do attend that, but I do not.
Yeah, it's an open meeting like this. Usually the agenda is pretty light. So yeah, definitely very welcome to add this to the agenda and just see who's interested. I expect most, if not all, mesh vendors are going to want some way to represent egress. So that may be one of the best places to find both prior art and interested collaborators on this.
Okay. Cool.
Cool. Yeah, well, thanks for raising this. Sorry, was there anything else?
Oh, anyways, I was just gonna mention I'm gonna be out for the next 3 weeks too.
Yeah, that's pretty common. I understand. Actually, one of our maintainers, Nick, will also be out for a few weeks, and so it's summer.
I feel bad bringing this up and then going away for a while.
It's completely fine. I understand. modifications are good and necessary. So yeah,
Okay.
cool.
Well, thank
All
you.
right. Yeah. Next up, okay, this was all part of the same thing. All right, great. The next one I just wanted to highlight was triage. We've got a few PRs in here that could use some review. First up is Mike's PR, which is a release blocker. So one of the most important ones out there right now. So it's documenting parent ref functionality for Gamma. Now that Gamma is finally considered experimental, it means we're releasing something, we're releasing a version of the API that officially contains support for the Gamma way of doing things. So that means we need to update the API spec and describe what that, and update it to so it's clear how Gamma and Mesh implement the API as well. So Mike took an initial go at this. I am overdue to actually review it myself, but I think at least Keith has already reviewed part of this. And please, this is a pretty big, although the PR itself is actually, no, the PR itself is fairly large now too, but please, yeah. Okay, mostly generated. Okay, thank you. But thank you, Mike, for taking this one on. And because it is such an important one, if you do have if anyone has extra review cycles, please make sure you take a look at this one in particular. Yeah, do you have anything specific to say? Anything you're unsure of on this one, Mike?
I think the biggest thing I'm looking for is any areas that folks have thought of that need to be updated for Gamma that are other than just the route parent ref stuff. So that's all that I'm really trying to address in this PR. But if there's like additional scope, or there should be a separate PR to update other parts of the API docs for Gamma, would definitely love folks to bring that to our attention.
Cool. Thanks a bunch for taking this one on. Yeah, I will continue to try and think of other places. It feels like we're missing something, but hopefully this really is all there is. Yeah. Okay, then next up, we mentioned before that the timeout gap had merged. So big thanks to Frank for his patience and pushing through on that one. And then in parallel, somebody was working on an implementation of that gap, which is awesome. So if anyone wants to review this, the gap is actually largely implemented, I think, at this point, and needing a review. Yeah, so I think this really just needs some people to take a look, make sure it matches up with the gap. And if you haven't paid that much attention to the gap, please pay attention to this, because this means it would enter the API as experimental, potentially as early as 080, which is a pretty quick turnaround. So yeah, just don't miss this one. Timeouts are a pretty big deal. So yeah. Then the very last one that I wanted to highlight is there have been some issues where reference grants are difficult to implement. And if you do it even slightly wrong, you can get into trouble. So this is a really great set of tests where they're adding a ton of invalid reference grant examples and basically showing you every possible way it could be done wrong, and ensuring that none of them are effective in granting access. So I think this is a really great addition. I just would appreciate a few implementations actually taking some time to test this out before we merge it in. I think at this point, Sunjay has added some comments and found an issue when you were running tests. I think that's it. And yeah, but otherwise, please, any additional feedback is very, very welcome on this one. Hoping to get this one into 080 as well. Yeah. Okay, well, that's all I've got on the agenda. Any last things, or should we call it good for today's meeting? All right, well, thank you, everyone. We'll see you in 2 weeks. And enjoy some time off next week if you get it. And yes, thanks everyone for the great feedback and discussion today. Have a great one.
Thank you. Bye-bye.